just wanted to thank you for coming. And Matt is here because of our Friends of the Library sponsoring this program. And I know we're in for a good time. So I'll leave it to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Years ago, somebody named Warren Sinclair put out a great book. This is like the Bible of Wachusett, as it were. Long, long out of print. And I just felt that there was a need and a time to finally come up with a more slightly updated, just another version to sort of continue the story, as it were, and to really give people the story that they may not know. There's a lot of great history to this mountain that people are kind of unaware of. So that was one of my main goals. And then combining it with hiking, right? There's a lot of people that have hiked the mountain before that really don't know what's up there. So that was kind of my main goal behind that. I really had the feeling that I would sell a few copies to some kids in the city that were going to read it, to plan their hikes and kind of think that it's neat that there was hotels at the summit, and it's done well. So that's not a complaint by any means. So there's two other quick books that I'll talk about before I really get into the actual talk tonight. One is the Wachusett Mountain Memories. This is just a ton of postcards that I've collected over the years. There's about 120 postcards in there. As we'll learn in a little while, it's really a tourist destination, and obviously the Instagram of the time was, social media of the time was postcards, right? When people would visit, they would send out postcards. So I did create a book of that. And there's another book I created a couple of years ago. I wrote an original book called Forward, Upward, Onward. I had gone through a major depression at age 40. At age 50, I decided I'm not going through this. I decided to hike the big 4,000-foot mountains of New Hampshire and kind of released a book that was based on lessons learned from the hike, as it were. After COVID, I decided I needed to get something back out of my system. I said, maybe I'll do that again. And then I thought, well, or maybe I could just hike the mountain in my backyard. So I hiked Wachusett 100 times, and the one mountain is Wachusett, as it were. But those are the Wachusett-related books, basically, that I put out over the last couple of years. And then I'll get the sales pitch out of the way, as it were. How many of you have been to the summit of Wachusett? So quite a bit of you. Cool. How many have hiked up? Quite a bit again. So this will be interesting for you tonight. There's a little bit of the hiking aspect, a little bit more of the history aspect, but we'll talk about either when it comes down to it. It's a very inclusive mountain. I often, and we'll see a sign in a minute that we'll have a laugh over, but I often compare it to Mount Washington sometimes because it doesn't get the same notoriety as a Washington would. Washington is really known for its rescues and its bad weather, and I often talk about hiking Washington is like a punch in the face, and hiking Wachusett is more like a big bear hug. I hiked Washington last year. I've hiked it a few times. And I think I quit hiking 4 times during the course of that hike. Wachusett is not always like that. It's a little bit easier to get up and get around, but it's really just a very accessible mountain. Obviously, there's also the chairlifts to go up there from the ski area. There's also the auto road, right? So it's a very accessible mountain altogether. The first sort of recollection, I guess you would say, from colonial America was from Governor John Winthrop, and he described it as a very high hill due west, and you could actually see it from the Atlantic Ocean at that time. And there are times on Wachusett you can actually see the Atlantic Ocean in reverse, obviously. He said that in 1632. So that's sort of the first recorded version of when somebody saw that. This is the sign that's up Mount Washington, in case anybody's ever seen this or has ever hiked it before, but they even have a more of a in-your-face version of it now about people dying up there. You'll never see this on Wachusett. So here's some facts and figures. I promise you, all of my slides are not like this. This is just the one big facts and figure one I kind of throw out there. It's located in 2 towns, Princeton and Westminster. For anybody familiar with the mountain lodge itself, the ski lodge is in Westminster. Princeton gets the pretty part, though. They actually get the summit. But most of it is in Princeton, parts of it are in Westminster. Elevation is 2,006 feet. It's the highest point in Massachusetts east of the Connecticut River. Again, it's one of those mountains, it's not very high, but for north central Massachusetts, It's what we got, right? It's the tallest we got out there. Over 17 miles of hiking trails. People are surprised to hear that sometimes. Wachusett is a monadnock, much like Mount Monadnock, if you're familiar with that as well, is a mountain that kind of stands alone, right? It's a mountain that's by itself. There's no ridge. There's no other mountains connected to it, which is considered a monadnock. It takes about 3,000 acres of alpine meadows, ponds, streams, fields, and some areas of old-growth forest, some of the biggest, largest patches east of the Connecticut River. Years ago, when they really found those, I wouldn't say by accident, but the ski area was going to do some enlargement from their property. Somebody ended up finding out that there was these tracts of old-growth forest, which are very rare in any area now, especially in New England. And they backed off, obviously, the creation of those new ski trails. Name Wachusett was thought to derive from the Algonquin languages, Nipmuc and Wampanoag. Roughly means near the mountain or mountain place. Some have translated it to mean the Great Hill. I've actually heard it as referred to also as the Great Meeting Place. Not enough that I was comfortable enough to put it in a guide and say that it was true, but it's still my favorite connotation of the mountain, right? We're here tonight because of it. I had a big event I was telling Denise earlier at Wachusett Mountain where a big corporation was there sort of doing their company outing. It's still attracting people in all ways and forms as a meeting place. The other reason that it used to be a mountain, sort of a meeting place for the Native Americans, is that it was the tallest structure in the area, right? It's the one, it was the North Star. They could see it better than anything else. It was very visible. So obviously, even if they didn't know the exact route, they knew exactly where they needed to go and what direction to go in. 1899, the Wachusett Mountain Reservation was established with plans for a summit observation tower, hotel, and carriage road. A lot of people don't realize also that most of Wachusett was privately owned. It was pasture, it was farmed. For anybody that have hiked it enough times, you can see the stone walls that line a lot of the areas out there. A lot of the back sort of access roads too were genuine roads used at the time. So there was a lot of farms out there, a lot of folks that were using that as their pasture land. So we'll talk a little about the hiking aspect, and like I said, we'll get into the history in a minute as well. Every trail has its own personality. What's one of the nice things about Wachusett? You can get up there in as little and back down to your car in as little as 40 minutes, taking a quick trail like Pine Hill, or you can spend all day out there. As we spoke about, the 17 and a half miles of trails, you can weave your way around that mountain all day if you'd like to. A lot of folks have used this for training purposes. Phil Karsha, if anybody's familiar with him, is a big sort of guy up in the White Mountains. He's done the entire thick White Mountains guide in one season. He's done something called the Grid, which is all the 48 4,000 footers in each month for each year kind of thing. So it's like they did Washington in January, Washington in February. So it's 576 peaks. And he did that in 10 and a half months. He did it in the shortest time ever. Another gentleman from Rutland actually climbed Everest, and that was his training ground. So there's a lot of ways that you can get in and about this mountain. 4 trails actually reach the summit, and we'll take a look at the trail names in a minute and the trails as well. The rest are kind of all connector trails. Longest trail on the mountain is Harrington, which is 1.4 miles. Shortest is Link. The 4 trails that actually go to the summit are Mountain House, Pine Hill, Old Indian, and Harrington. All the rest are connector trails that connect all of these together. So you can do infinite amount of loops, an infinite amount of ways to get up the mountain. It kind of makes it interesting. It's a great opportunity to hike for an hour again or to hike all day. Mid-State Trail goes through the heart of Wachusett. It actually covers quite a bit of trails out there. The Mid-State Trail runs from New Hampshire all the way down to Rhode Island, or Rhode Island to New Hampshire, depending on which way you're going. It's 92 miles. Had great popularity, brought back again in the 70s and 80s, but it was actually created in the 1920s. But during the course of that resurgence in the 70s and 80s, they decided to really sort of revamp it and get the trail a little bit easier to follow. It was very difficult in the 20s. But the trails that it encompasses on Wachusett: Balance Rock, Old Indian, Semyahenna, West Side, Mountain House, Link, Harrington, and Dickens. So it's quite a bit. Semyahenna itself was actually created for the Mid-State Trail. It was a connector trail they needed to do to sort of make everything work out, as it were. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first I wanted to show you the namesake of Mountain House Trail. This is Mountain House. So this was the first hotel that was sort of brought to Wachusett. It was at the base as opposed to on the summit. They found that a lot of folks were starting to come out here and really starting to vacation or summer, as it were. There's a lot of folks that were in the cities at the time, New York, Boston, suburbs of that area. During the course of the summers, you have to remember it was all horses, and obviously the cleanup was not always fantastic. The smell in the summer in the cities was horrendous. So a lot of doctors, a lot of advertisements, a lot of people always talked about getting to the country, right, and summering out here. So people started to venture their way out here, especially when the railroads were put into effect, and that was in the 1870s where the railroads came in. People would come into Princeton or Fitchburg, and they would take the stagecoach the rest of the way, basically. There was some access to the summits at this point through Mountain House Trail, as it were, but there was no access for a carriage or a horse, as it were. So people stayed here and kind of made their way up to the top of the mountain. You can actually still see the foundation of that house if you start to walk up Mountain House, if you're familiar with it at all. You don't have to walk up far. Obviously, it's at the base. You'll see a little placard there from the Princeton Historical Society with the QR code that will get you the information about Mountain House as well. There's a couple of other different pictures in the book, too. The original person that lived here was Elijah Hobbs, and he settled here in 1767, rather. Built a small house. In 1856, Daniel Howe enlarged it. In 1859, Samuel and Moses Bullard bought the property and officially opened the hotel. So it officially opened in about 1859, 1860. In 1884, it could hold as much as 100 guests. Burned to the ground, unfortunately, in 1914, which you do hear a lot from some of these old structures. Earlier, I talked about the pasture and folks that were farming on the mountain. At that point, you actually can see a summit house up there. But you can see this is kind of where the ski area, the lodge is, where the farm is. This is called the Roper Farm. One of the other things that was kind of surprising in its day, and this happened in the White Mountains as well, is the deforestation, right? So during the course of the late 1800s, to build houses and to build a lot of the new structures that were coming up, a lot of the area was deforested. So when we talked about that old growth earlier in those pockets, they're very rare to find because much of New England, the exact same thing happened. So chances are you're not going to see many trees, whether here or the White Mountains, in a lot of different areas that are over 125 years old. That's kind of the limit of a lot of them. And when you see an old growth tree, you know it. You'll see a lot of main streets have them. Once in a while, a pasture will have one left that they saved there for a lot of their horses and cattle, et cetera. Semyahenna we talked about earlier. It's one of the trails that really connects the mid-state the way that it needed to be done. It's one of the last trails that were actually built on Wachusett, and it was done during the 60s. For years, I always thought the Semyahenna had this really deep name. It almost sounds like a Native American, like near the lake or over the moon, or something that really had this cool connotation to it. Long story short, the gentleman that named the trail and helped to produce it, his name was Robert Humes. He was one of the first makers of the maps of the mountain, right? So he did the map for not only the hiking trails, but some of the ski trails that were in place at some point as well. And he named it after his wife. It's actually Ann Humes backwards. So that kind of took the wind out of my sails when I heard that. But it was a good homage to his wife. One of the other namesakes, or one of the cool things that people used to go out to quite a bit, and I actually was leading hikes out here today for the corporation I was talking about, it's called Balance Rock. At one time it was also called Double Boulder. They're glacial erratics. So at one point, Wachusett was under almost a mile of ice, right? And a lot of these ice sheets that were coming through were just depositing these sort of random boulders here and there, which you'll see hiking around the mountain quite a bit. This one happened to get stacked on top of each other. They're not connected, they're not the same boulder, as it were, or came from the same source necessarily, but they get toppled kind of on top of one another. If you've ever been out to this area, you'll notice that it's all trees now. There's nothing that's even close to this right now. Can you imagine back in the day hiking in a full wool dress or suits, or like you were going to church or for Christmas kind of thing? But this was one of the cool attractions that people used to go to in the late 1800s. The postcard book has quite a bit of the Balance Rock in it. And again, everyone's got a wool suit on, right? They've all got their loafers and their ties. And it's not easy to climb up that either. I don't know how those guys did that. It was once known as double boulder. It's about 30 tons, a combined weight of both of those. So it's not a small structure. Years ago, they said that there was the rumor that you could actually rock them back and forth, but I think that's rumor, to be honest with you. Taking a good look at it again today, I kind of determined that. I was mentioning earlier, I do a Wachusett Facebook group. We have about 2,000 or 3,000 people in there. It's actually a pretty large group considering for a small mountain, right? But we do a trail tracer patch, it's called. It gives a good chance for a lot of people to head out and visit all of those 19 trails in the 17 half miles. Doesn't need to be done in a day. I always like to mention it though, because a lot of people like that for a goal, right? They like to determine how to get through those trails and to sort of check them off and get a patch out of it. I have a lot of kids that are 7, 8, 9 years old writing in crayon or pencil that submit these in, and it's kind of neat to see a lot of kids out there experiencing parts of the mountain they never would otherwise. So the ski area, this is actually a picture of them sort of building it originally from the 70s. It was expanded greatly in the 80s, 82, 83, they really had a major expansion. Just a couple of facts and figures about the ski area. Right now, they currently have 27 trails and 8 lifts and can handle up to 9,200 skiers an hour. They just put new lifts in very recently, so these really bring folks up there fast and by quite a bit. Approximately 1,000 vertical feet of skiing, and every trail out there is supported by snowmaking, which is actually rare for a ski area. So they've got their stuff together as far as making sure that the season is not only extended, but brought in a little bit early. As long as it's cold enough, they can keep making snow. They've been skiing since the earliest 20th century. Some of the first trails that were built out there were Balance Rock Trail, actually, from this area out. And they were done as sort of a cross-country skiing situation. They started to clear some of the trails in the 30s. Some of the Conservation Corps, after the Depression, started to go up there and clear them. But they really weren't used for skiing. You had to hike up basically and ski yourself back down. During the 1940s, the 10th Mountain Division did some training there for Europe for World War II. The real ski area, as it were, as we kind of know it today, they started to clear the trails in 1959. There was a ski lift, which is actually just sort of a T-bar, I guess you would call it, that kind of pushed you up the hill, was built in 1962. 1968, Ralph Crowley started to lease the property. The Crowleys still sort of run it today. It is leased. They don't own they own the structures obviously on it, but they lease the property from the state. I believe it's a 30-year lease that keeps getting renewed, if I'm not mistaken, on that one. And the current lodge, like I said, was in 82, 83, the big one that you see now. The Crowleys also own Polar beverages, so if you've ever seen Polar. If you go to Wachusett, you can never get a Pepsi or a Coke. The Legend of Lucy Keys. This is actually a really cool story. I always like to kind of read directly from this because it's an easier way to sort of just tell the story. It's 18 pages. I'm just kidding. So the Legend of Lucy Keys. If you've ever hiked the quiet trails of Mount Wachusett as the sun sets behind the trees, you may have heard whispers on the wind. Some say those sounds are the cries of a mother searching for her lost child. This is the legend of Lucy Keys, one of Massachusetts' most enduring ghost stories. On April 14, 1755, Martha Keys sent her older daughters, Patty and Anna, to gather sand from the shores of Wachusett Lake. In those days, sand was used like soap to scrub household items. Their youngest sister, Lucy, just 4 years old, tried to follow them. She left the house and walked down the same path toward the lake, but Lucy never caught up with her sisters, and she never came home. The Keys family lived on a remote farm on the eastern side of Wachusett. If anybody's familiar with Pine Hill or that area, it's kind of in that area. They had moved there from Shrewsbury just a few years earlier. Surrounded by thick woods, it was easy for someone, especially a small child, to lose their way. After Lucy disappeared, her parents searched for her relentlessly. Mr. Keys sold off pieces of the land and even asked the government for help, nearly losing everything in the process. Mrs. Keys wandered the forest for years, calling out her daughter's name in hope that Lucy might answer, but the little girl was never found. Over the years, there's two main theories that have tried to explain what happened to Lucy. One of them, there was a neighbor that supposedly admitted to killing Lucy, but that really didn't hold too much water. One was a little bit more hopeful. There was some folks believe a local Native American tribe found her and took her in. Many years later, travelers near the Canadian border reported meeting a white woman living among the tribe who spoke little English, but remembered once living near a place she called Wachusett Hill. There has been legends of footprints in the snow that nobody knew where they came from, etc. I've never heard or seen anything myself, but that is the legend of Lucy Keys. There was a movie made about the legend of Lucy Keys many years later. This is from 2006. It did not get very good reviews. It didn't win the Academy Award that year, I can promise you. I've still never seen it, but a lot of it was filmed in Princeton. It was very loosely based on the story of Lucy Keys. So some of you might recognize this guy, Henry David Thoreau. First, I'll talk about a couple of other visitors that have been to the top of Wachusett. Henry David Thoreau has been to the top of Wachusett, obviously, which is why he's up there. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, John Greenleaf Whittier, and Thomas Edison have all made it to the top of Wachusett at one point or another. Obviously, Edison is more from Jersey. A lot of these other authors, though, and writers are very local-ish, to the Boston area, as it were. So Henry David Thoreau sort of did a major excursion up Wachusett in 1842. He walked all the way from Concord to Wachusett. He released an essay the year later called A Walk to Wachusett, appropriately named, obviously. You can Google it. You can take a look. The whole thing's right on there for free, obviously, if you ever wanted to read what he officially wrote. There's a quick passage I'd always read from that as well. A lot of it it's very informative because it's not, I'm going to read sort of the poetic side of it, but a lot of his account is literally the account of going up there. But especially I remember thee, Wachusett, who like me standest alone without society. Thy far blue eye, a remnant of the sky, seen through the clearing or the gorge, or the windows of the forge, doth leaven all it passes by. Nothing is true, but stands between me and you, thou western pioneer, who know'st not shame or fear, by venturous spirit driven under the eaves of heaven, and canst expand thee there and breathe enough of air, uphold heaven, holding down earth, thy pastime from thy birth, not steadied by the one, not leaning on the other, may I approve myself thy worthy brother. I wrote one quick commentary in here, which I think is kind of neat, and I always like to explain after as well. This passage reveals much about how Thoreau saw both Wachusett and himself. He identified with the mountain solitude, its independence, and its enduring role as a Western pioneer, standing between earth and sky. For Thoreau, Wachusett was not just a place to climb, it was a kindred spirit. Can you imagine, there was no drones, right? There was no aerial photography. Can you imagine Thoreau walking all the way from Concord, getting up to the top of the mountain and seeing his house is a strong way of saying it, but seeing the walk that he had done basically. Because you can see Boston from the top of Wachusett. I'm quite sure you can see Concord as well. It was his version of also seeing a mountain, as we talked about, that stands alone, right? It's a mid-adnock. It's not associated with anything else around it. So Thoreau really found a kindred spirit in that, much like I do. And again, look up the essay if you get a chance. It's pretty cool. A lot of it's very informative. So if anybody's familiar with the Echo Lake area, which is kind of at the base, and it's off to the side a little bit, I only noticed for the last time there's some nice ducks there too. They used to have an ice house there, right? And this is something that you go to now, you would never recognize or see any remnants of this ice house that were there. Why would they need an ice house? Well, obviously there was no electricity. They needed refrigeration of some sort. So during the course of the winter, they would cut these blocks out, either 15-inch cubes or 2 by 4 feet by 8-inch slabs. They would store them in this building basically full of sawdust, and they would have ice all summer. So a lot of the slabs and the chunks of ice that were in here were brought up to the summit. So a lot of the folks that were visiting in these summit houses that we'll see in a little while were able to enjoy refrigeration, as it were, or some fresh food before electricity was brought up there. And electricity was actually brought up very early to Wachusett. It was 1918 they brought electricity up, which is earlier than some of the other places in the area. They began harvesting in 1903 for the ice. In 1915 is when the barn was built. But after the electricity and the advent of refrigeration, there really wasn't a need for it maybe a decade later. This is the superintendent's house. This is, again, right next to Echo Lake. It's on the base of the mountain, basically. A beautiful superintendent's house. Obviously, you got to realize that when Wachusett became sort of its reservation, nobody drove to work, right? This is 1903. People needed to stay there. This is the superintendents, the people who were in charge of the mountain, as it were. This is their office and their residence. They weren't commuting every single day. So this was built in 1903. It served most of the residents in an office. Unfortunately, it was left in decay. As time went on, 50s and 60s, obviously, you could commute to work. They built a brand new hiker's sort of lodge in the reservation itself, if anybody's familiar with. They had a lot more to do with their offices and places that they could work out of, as it were. It was very sad to see this for years and years sort of go to ruin. 1969, it was actually left, it was abandoned, is when it was first abandoned. It kind of seemed like there was no hope for it for a while, but the state, in its infinite wisdom, did something very cool. They decided that if somebody wanted to renovate it and to sort of create something that was involved with the community, they would give them free rent for 20 years, basically. So the person's job that took it over, basically, was to sort of renovate, and they would have free rent for quite a while. It became Mountainside Cafe. Anybody been here yet? There's quite a bit of people, which is pretty cool. Phenomenal owners, fantastic coffee, and really good beer. They actually have a little house that's off to the side there that does beer on the weekends from a local brewery out of Worcester. But it's fantastic. You can sit on the rotunda out there. They got great food, great meals. 2017, Catherine Huck and Rob in Springfield remodeled the entire thing. And in 2019, opened to the public. And then COVID. But they still did well. They were an existing business for a while in the Princeton area that ended up coming and moving into there. But it was so glad to see that renovated. And there's some offices on the top. They rent out to some folks as well. This is a photo. This is one of the most surprising facts to me as I was going through a lot of this research. This is sort of the creation of the old auto road, which is really the carriage road at that point. There was no automobiles. This was done by prisoners. So the prisoners were able to do about a mile worth of the road in about 8 months. The surprising part to me is that the prisoners lived on the mountain. They actually lived in the Bolton Pond area. They had a camp. And for 8 months, obviously these were not murderers or high profile prisoners, as it were, but they put them to work. They lived on the mountain. They said they were very well behaved and they worked very hard. But you can imagine that a mile's worth of road with pick and shovel and horse and wagon, as it were, was actually probably not bad for its time before the advent of machinery came around. A lot of the prisoners also built some of the structures like this, which was on Mountain House. I still haven't found any remnants of it at any point on Mountain House to find out or tell you where it was. But they had a lot of these cool old lookouts, as it were. Prisoners were there around 1912 up until the mid-teens, as it were. They weren't there very long, but they did do quite a bit of the work that was on Wachusett. Rumor has it there's still some remnants I've never seen myself of some of the structure of the camps that used to be there. That's something that maybe I ought to go out and check out myself one of these days. The advent of the auto road itself became a little bit more involved and went a little quicker once they got the advent of machinery. This is during the 1920s, as it were. The original road was a two-way road that kind of had one section that just went up and down to it. For anybody familiar with the road that's been on there now, it's a loop. The rest of the loop was actually built during the course of the 30s. Another surprising fact that I didn't know myself, they used to have auto races up Wachusett. This is obviously the old dirt road that they had at one point or another. It was a timed situation where they ended up heading up from the center of Princeton every July 4th. They did this for almost 20 years. And a lot of these cars were one cylinder, right? They were new to the mountain, new to the area, obviously. So a lot of them didn't make it, but yeah, they had, and it was very popular, obviously, you can see as well. During the 1930s as well, we talked about, after the Depression, they were putting a lot of folks to work continuing to build that auto road and some of the structures. This is Harlow Outlook, which is on the auto road itself. This was revamped and redone in 2012, along with repaving the auto road itself. They really improved a lot of the infrastructure that was up there. But this has been around since the 30s as well. And this was named after Theodore Harlow, who was an early commissioner of the mountain. So this is some of my favorite parts of the talk when I always talk about them. Because if you go to the top of Wachusett right now, there is no remnants of any structures that were a hotel or a concession stand or anything of any major size up there. And it still shocks me that these used to be on the summit of Wachusett. So this is the first summit house, which really kind of wasn't, they're calling it a summit house because it was just basically a place for people to rest their weary heads, as it were. It was more of a concession stand when it first opened. 1866, William Morse set up this concession stand. So what do you sell in 1866 for tourists that are coming up and doing their thing? He sold candy bars and cigars, were kind of the two main things that he used to sell there. 1870, they increased this a little bit to be more of the stone structure that you see there. They were beginning to take in patrons that were able to sleep over, literally a couple at that point. As you can see, they expanded dramatically as more of these tourists started to come in. Again, railroads came in 1870. In 1875, they expanded this to include a wooden addition and a bowling alley. Mountain House, by the way, the original hotel that I was showing you as well, also had a bowling alley. They seemed to be very popular back then. So imagine a bowling alley on the top of Mount Wachusett. This is another view with a barn on it. Again, if anybody's familiar with the Pine Hill trail that's on the top of the summit, that's actually where the barn is right now. And again, if you walk into that area, there's just, you'd never know any of that was ever up there. So obviously when you were bringing horses up and you were bringing patrons up, there needed to be a place where you can feed and store the horses, as it were. So they built this enormous horse barn. And you can see the original lookout tower that was up there as well to the left, which they expanded higher than the original picture that I showed you. And in 1879 is when the full expansion happened here, adding more refreshments and full dinners for a lot of the folks that were coming up, and additional rooms for people to sleep. Along with Echo Lake down below, there was a summit pond at the summit as well, which is still there. It looks a little different than this, obviously. They used to use this sort of windmill system, I guess you would say, to pipe some of the water from two different places. From here, it used to go directly to the hotel, or the summit house, as it were. It was used more for washing than it was actually potable water. But this also drew water from the Echo Lake area as well, which was considered as potable water at that point. When tourism started to really become big, they really started to obviously advertise for a lot of these folks to come out from the cities to say, hey, we can handle you. This is Summit House number 2. So these are all privately owned. The land was privately owned on the top of the mountain as well. This is before the reservations ended up taking over. Built in 1884 by Beeman and Son. This brought up to 30,000 visitors a year. Wachusett was starting to get really popular, and obviously as they created that auto road, carriage road as it were, a lot of people were able to get up to the summit a lot easier without having to hike it. You'll notice that there's another fire tower at top as well. There's been a fire tower out there since the late 1870s. There was no internet back there, no telephone. There was a way to signal each fire tower as it went along. There was one on Watatic. There was one on Monadnock. You'll see remnants of all of those. And when something was happening, they were able to signal each one of those to go down the line, depending on where the fire was and how they needed to be contacted. I always thought this is a pretty picture of the Summit Hotel up there. Offered 30 rooms from $10 to $15 a week or $250 a night. That was actually a lot of money back then. An ad from 1886 claimed a visit to Mount Wachusett could improve your health. Persons subject to attacks of hay fever and rheumatism, completely unrelated, but apparently there are cures for both, experienced great relief by a stay of a few days at the summit. That was the menu at the time. I got a cool picture in the book about the dining room that was up there. It was kind of ornate, actually. It was pretty cool. So obviously you can get dinner up there even if you weren't a guest, but people weren't really doing a lot of day trips back then, as we talked about earlier. There was lamb and mint sauce. There was 9 kinds of pie. Apparently pie was pretty popular. And liquor, mostly beer and champagne. There's some cold meats listed here, and one of them is tongue, which doesn't sound very appealing to me, but apparently that was considered a delicacy back in the day. Another cool picture. This is down by the Harrington Trail area, if anybody, again, is familiar with people that have been up there. You can see the horses all in the background. Summit House number 2 was open from May 20th to October 15th, so there was a limited season. Obviously, the winter ended up kicking in, and they didn't plow back then. You either ride by railroad from Fitchburg or Princeton, as we talked about, and you finish up by stagecoach. They didn't get real fancy with these names. This is Summit House number 3. You'd figure they were named after somebody or the area, but Summit Houses 1, 2, and 3. Opened in 1908. The old Summit House was disassembled piece by piece and brought down. The reason that they did that is it was starting to become a tad old, but now the reservation owned this. They wanted to have their own version of the hotel. They wanted to run the hotel. They wanted to build the hotel. They were the ones that, again, they disassembled the old one and put this one back up again. And you see the 2,018 feet above sea level is, I've seen it everywhere from 2,300, 200. As time went on and technology got a little bit better, you'd see that it get more accurate. 2006 is the official designation for it now. And this opened under county management, so it was no longer run by an individual. It was run by the state, as it were. Summit House number 3 allowed cars from noon to 2 and then 5 to 7 when automobiles were first allowed up there. It may or may not sound obvious, but they used to scare the horses, right? When automobiles first came out, horses couldn't coincide with them going up and down the mountain. So they had to pick designated times for these automobiles to go up. 1902 was the first recorded auto up the summit. It was pretty early. By 1912, 5,000 autos were going up per season. So that shows you how quickly the automobile really came around to the Wachusett area. The best season on record was considered as 1919 for this particular Summit House, as it were. Unfortunately, in 1960s, vandalism and decline happened on the building. It really went into neglect. Does anybody remember this building? My dad talks about it quite often as well, going up for, at that point, they sold mostly trinkets and like a gift store in there, right? It was, I think, banners you could buy and things of that nature. They were no longer serving folks to stay there or serving folks as dinner or anything of that nature. But it is the last remaining Summit House out there that a lot of folks still do have memory of. December 18th, 1970, it was burned by an arsonist. One of the last presentations I gave, I had a former fire chief of Keene, and he said they could see it all the way from Keene, New Hampshire, when it was burning that night. After the last Summit House, you'll see the tower in the back was built very shortly after that. The fire towers are still a very important part of Wachusett and the Wachusett story. That was there until 2012 when the new tower was built, basically, which is in front. I kind of was able to catch a picture before they took one down and opened the other. So 2012, they opened a brand new observation deck with this beautiful new fire tower that was up there. They did a really good job with it. It's very accessible. A lot of folks can go up there that might not otherwise. Once a year, you're able to go up into that fire tower, the brand new fire tower that's up there, and that's coming up soon. It's August 9th. It's Smokey the Bear's birthday. So it's, again, an homage to Smokey, I guess, being a fire tower. I'm not going to lie to you, I went up there last year and it scared the heck out of me. It's a steep, steep climb, but it's cool. It was kind of neat to see a different view. It might not sound like it's a different view from the observation deck below, but it actually really is. You can actually see quite far from there. And as mentioned, you can see Boston on a clear day. You can see Boston very clearly. If you ever go up for sunset, as a matter of fact, you can actually start to see the sun shining off the Prudential, off a lot of the buildings out there. It's kind of a neat sight to see. This is the tower alone without the other tower behind it as well. I'm still shocked that a lot of the remnants of a lot of the things that were up there, including the old tower even, is something that just kind of disappeared. You really can't see that much anymore. Anybody seen Shallow Hal before? The movie Shallow Hal? This was a popular movie that came out maybe about 15 years ago with Jack Black, very popular actor, and Gwyneth Paltrow. Not a majority, but a good part of this movie was actually filmed on Wachusett. So if you see the very end where they're in Colorado skiing down a mountain, it's actually Wachusett. There's a lot of area, as I was watching it, I kept saying, I know that house, I know that barn. They filmed a lot of the area on Route 140, et cetera, in that general area. Another movie filmed there very recently, a couple of years ago, was A Very Vermont Christmas. It's a Hallmark movie. I don't know the premise, but you can probably guess it because I think they're all kind of the same. But catch it, if you happen to catch it on there, a good portion of that was actually filmed at Wachusett as well. I'll sort of end it with this. I think this is one of my favorite pictures of old Wachusett. This really just sort of screams kids having fun, summering, enjoying the outdoors and having fun out there. I think that's what Wachusett really is still to me. It's still become an important part of who I am and what I've done in my own life. But I got to remember that that goes back hundreds of years, even to the Native Americans, as it were. So it's still an important part of me to really reiterate over and over again. It really is that great meeting place, or it is that great place that people hold very fondly, even to this day. So there it is. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Well, we can open it up to, thank you.